The rain fell in light drops that Sunday morning, as if the sky itself couldn't decide whether to weep openly or hold back its tears. Anna Chen stood next to her father in the cemetery, her small hand clutching his much larger one. At 12 years old, she understood death in the way children do, as something final and mysterious that takes people away forever. But understanding didn't make it any easier to accept that her mother was gone. 3 weeks ago, Lisa Chen had taken her last breath after fighting cancer for 2 long years. The battle had drained everything from their family, their savings, their energy, and most of all, their hope. Now, as Anna looked at her mother's casket, draped with white lilies and photographs, she felt strangely empty, as if all her tears had already been used up during those long nights at the hospital. Her father, David, hadn't spoken more than a few necessary words since Lisa died. Once a man who filled rooms with laughter and stories, he now stood silent beside his daughter, his face pale and drawn. Anna noticed how his hands trembled slightly as people approached to offer condolences. She also saw how he kept touching his chest, just over his heart when he thought nobody was watching. "I'm so sorry for your loss," said a woman Anna barely recognized, perhaps one of her mother's co-workers from the library. Lisa was such a wonderful person. David nodded without speaking. Anna squeezed his hand tighter. The funeral home had warned them to expect about 50 people. Instead, nearly 200 had shown up. Friends, neighbors, Lisa's students from her reading classes, and even people from town who only knew her in passing. It seemed her mother had touched more lives than Anna had realized. Uncle Peter approached them, his eyes red-rimmed behind his glasses. "David, you need to sit down for a while. The doctor said you shouldn't be on your feet too long." Anna glanced up at her father. The doctor had been worried about his heart for months now. The stress of Lisa's illness had caused something the doctors called cardiomyopathy, a weakening of the heart muscle. They'd explained it to Anna in simple terms. Sometimes when people experience great sadness, their hearts can actually become physically damaged. They called it broken heart syndrome, which made perfect sense to Anna. Of course, hearts could break from sadness. Hers felt like it had shattered into a million pieces. "I'm fine," David replied in a voice that suggested he was anything but fine. Anna noticed her father sway slightly, and she tightened her grip on his hand. More people were lining up to speak to them, their faces all wearing the same expression of careful sympathy. "Dad, maybe we should sit down for a minute," Anna suggested quietly. He looked down at her as if just remembering she was there. Something flickered in his eyes, guilt perhaps, and he allowed her to lead him to a nearby bench under a maple tree. The leaves above them were just beginning to turn golden at the edges. As they sat, Anna watched the funeral guests mingling and speaking in hushed tones. She caught fragments of conversations, people sharing memories of her mother, talking about what a fighter she had been, how unfair it all was. "She was only 38, someone whispered. Anna thought about the day they'd first learned about her mother's illness. She'd come home from school to find both her parents sitting at the kitchen table, holding hands, their faces serious. They'd tried to explain it in a way that wouldn't frighten her too much. "Mom is sick," her father had said, "but she's going to fight very hard to get better." And fight she did. For 2 years, Lisa Chen battled against the cancer that had started in her breast and eventually spread to her bones. There were good days when it seemed like she might win, days of laughter and normal family dinners. And then there were the bad days, which grew more frequent as time passed, days of hospital visits, of her mother too weak to get out of bed, of whispered conversations between her parents that stopped whenever Anna entered the room. Through it all, her father had been their rock. He took family medical leave from his job as an engineer to care for Lisa. He learned to give injections, to manage medication schedules, to cook meals that might tempt his wife's diminishing appetite. He made spreadsheets of treatment options and researched experimental trials. He never showed weakness, not until the very end. The change in him had been sudden and alarming. 3 days before Lisa died, when the hospice nurse told them it would be soon, something in David seemed to break. The determined light in his eyes dimmed, His shoulders slumped. He stopped asking questions about treatments or medications. It was as if he'd finally accepted what was coming, and the acceptance had hollowed him out. Anna. She looked up to see her teacher, Ms. Kelly, standing before them. Unlike the other adults who seemed uncomfortable around grief, Ms. Kelly didn't hesitate. She knelt down in front of Anna so they were at eye level. "I brought you something," she said, holding out a small book with a cloth cover. "It's a journal. When my dad died when I was about your age, writing down my thoughts helped me a lot." Anna took the journal, running her fingers over the soft blue fabric. "Thank you. Your mom was so proud of your writing," Ms. Kelly continued. "She always told me how you have a way with words." This made Anna's throat tighten. Her mother had been her biggest fan, the one who encouraged her stories and poems, who saved everything Anna wrote in a special box decorated with seashells from their last beach vacation together. "The service is about to start," Uncle Peter announced, approaching them again. "They want the family to come to the front now." David stood up, his movements slow and careful. Anna noticed how his face had a grayish tint, how deeply lined it had become in just 3 weeks. At 41, her father suddenly looked like an old man. As they walked toward the front row of chairs set up before her mother's casket, Anna felt the weight of eyes upon them. The curious, pitying gazes of people watching the tragedy of a young girl and her heartbroken father. She straightened her back and lifted her chin, just as her mother would have done. The ceremony passed in a blur of prayers, music, and speeches. Uncle Peter talked about Lisa's childhood, her love of books, her dedication to teaching children to read. Her best friend Judy spoke about Lisa's kindness, her humor, her courage during illness. When it came time for David to speak, he simply shook his head, unable to find words. Instead, to everyone's surprise, Anna stood up. With shaking hands, she unfolded a paper from her pocket. "I wrote something for my mom," she said, her voice small but clear in the hushed gathering. Looking down at her paper, she read, "My mom taught me that stories are like magic. They can take you anywhere, even when your body has to stay put. During the hard days when she couldn't get out of bed, we traveled to faraway places in books. She said that even when people leave us, their stories stay. So I promised to keep telling your stories, Mom. I promised to remember everything." When she returned to her seat, her father reached for her hand. His eyes were dry but vacant, as if he were looking at something far away that only he could see. Anna had not seen him cry, not even once, since her mother died. The doctors had mentioned this too, how some people shut down their emotions when grief becomes too overwhelming. They gently suggested counseling, but David had brushed aside the recommendation. After the service, people filed past the family to offer final condolences. Many hugged Anna, telling her to be strong, to take care of her father. Adults often said strange things to children during sad times, she thought, as if she needed to be reminded to care for the only parent she had left. As the crowd began to thin, Anna noticed her father's breathing had become shallow. He kept rubbing his left arm, wincing slightly. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked. He nodded, but the gesture lacked conviction. "Just tired," he whispered. The funeral director approached them. "The cars are ready whenever you're prepared to leave," he said. "Take all the time you need." Anna looked at her mother's casket one last time. Tomorrow it would be lowered into the ground and a part of their lives would be buried with it. She wondered how they would go on, how they would fill the terrible emptiness in their home and their hearts. As if reading her thoughts, her father spoke, his voice barely audible. "I don't know how to do this without her." It was the most honest thing he'd said since her mother died, and hearing it made Anna's eyes fill with fresh tears. She didn't know how to do this either, but somehow they would have to find a way forward together. The day after the funeral was Monday, but Anna didn't go to school. Uncle Peter had told her teacher she might need the whole week off. The house felt strange, too quiet, yet somehow filled with a heavy presence that made it hard to breathe. All the casseroles and sympathy cakes that neighbors had brought sat untouched in the refrigerator. Neither Anna nor her father had much appetite. David Chen had barely moved from the armchair in the living room since they'd returned from the cemetery yesterday evening. He'd slept there all night, refusing to go to the bedroom he had shared with Lisa. When Anna had covered him with a blanket around midnight, he didn't seem to notice. Anna wandered through the silent house, touching things that reminded her of her mother. The row of cookbooks in the kitchen, many with handwritten notes in the margins. The collection of smooth stones from various hiking trips arranged on the windowsill. The half-finished scarf still attached to knitting needles, waiting for hands that would never complete it. Around noon, when her father still hadn't spoken or eaten, Anna made 2 sandwiches and brought one to him with a glass of water. "You should eat something, Dad," she said, placing the plate on the side table next to him. He nodded vaguely but didn't reach for the food. Anna sat cross-legged on the floor beside his chair and ate her own sandwich slowly. The ticking of the clock on the mantel seemed unnaturally loud. "Mrs. Wilson from next door called," Anna said after a while. "She wanted to know if we need anything from the store." When her father didn't respond, she added, "I told her we're okay for now." Was this how it would be from now on? Her talking and her father lost in silence. The thought made her throat tighten with fresh grief. After lunch, Anna decided to tackle her mother's closet. Several relatives had offered to help with this difficult task, but Anna couldn't bear the thought of strangers going through her mother's things, deciding what to keep and what to give away. She wanted to do it herself, on her own terms. She pushed open the bedroom door slowly. The room smelled like her mother, a mix of lavender lotion and the jasmine tea she loved to drink. The bed was still made with hospital corners, the way Lisa had insisted on doing it even during her illness, saying that keeping normal routines helped her feel in control of something. Anna approached the closet with hesitant steps. Inside, her mother's clothes hung neatly, blouses organized by color, dresses on the right, pants on the left. Lisa had always been particular about order. "A place for everything and everything in its place," she would say, a phrase that annoyed Anna whenever her mother asked her to clean her room. Now, standing before the carefully arranged closet, Anna was grateful for her mother's orderliness. It felt like one last gift, the ability to find things easily, to navigate her absence with some semblance of a map. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she spotted the shoebox on the top shelf. It wasn't like the other storage boxes. Those were clear plastic with labels. This was an old-fashioned shoebox with a lid, the kind people use to keep special things. Standing on tiptoes and stretching as far as she could, Anna managed to grasp the edge of the box and slide it forward. It was heavier than she expected. As she brought it down, something shifted inside with a soft thud. Anna carried the box to her mother's side of the bed and sat down, the mattress sinking slightly beneath her. For a moment, she just stared at the lid, unsure if she was ready for whatever lay inside. Taking a deep breath, she removed the cover. The first thing she saw was her mother's journal, the leather-bound one with the tree embossed on the cover. Lisa had written in it regularly, especially after her diagnosis. Anna had never read it, respecting her mother's privacy. Beneath the journal were several envelopes, each with a name written on the front in her mother's neat handwriting. Anna recognized her own name on one of them, her father's on another. There were also envelopes addressed to Uncle Peter, to Lisa's best friend Judy, and to Lisa's parents who lived in California. With trembling fingers, Anna picked up the envelope with her name. It wasn't sealed, the flap simply tucked inside. She slid out a single sheet of paper, unfolded it, and began to read. "My darling Anna, if you're reading this, it means I've had to leave you much sooner than either of us wanted. I'm writing this on a good day. The sun is shining through my window and I can hear you practicing your piano piece in the living room. These good days are precious to me, and I want you to know that even in my hardest moments, the joy of being your mother has made every day worthwhile. I have so many things I want to tell you. Advice about growing up, stories from my childhood that you haven't heard yet, answers to questions you might have years from now when you're facing your own life challenges. But paper can only hold so much, and time isn't being generous with me. So I'll tell you the most important thing. Your father is going to need you now. You know how he is. so strong for everyone else, never wanting to show weakness. He's been my protector through all of this, but who protects the protector when they break? That will have to be you for a while, my brave girl. When grief makes your father silent, be his voice. When sorrow makes him still, be his movement. He won't know how to live without me at first. We've been together since college, and he's forgotten what it means to be just David instead of David and Lisa. Remind him. Not with words. He won't hear those right away. Remind him with your presence. Sit with him in his silence. Share your grief with him so he knows he's not alone in his. And when the moment is right, when you feel it in your heart, help him remember that continuing to live isn't a betrayal of me or my memory. I've left him a letter too, but he might not be ready to read it yet. That's okay. Keep it safe for him, until he can. I wish with every fiber of my being that I could stay and watch you grow into the amazing woman I know you'll become. Since I can't, I'm leaving little pieces of myself hidden throughout our house, notes in books, messages tucked into winter coats, memories pressed between album pages. Think of them as a treasure hunt that will last for years. My way of being, there for special moments even when I'm gone. Remember that love doesn't end when people do. Mine will stay with you always. Mom. Anna read the letter 3 times, tears falling onto the paper and making small wrinkles where they landed. Her mother had known, had prepared, had somehow found the strength to think about what would happen after she was gone and tried to help them through it. Through her tears, Anna looked at the envelope with her father's name. Should she give it to him now? Would it help or would it only deepen his pain? She decided to wait, tucking his letter back into the box. The journal, though, that felt like it was meant for her to read. Anna opened it, feeling like she was being allowed into a private conversation with her mother. The early entries were from before the diagnosis. Everyday reflections about family life, ideas for weekend trips, notes about Anna's school achievements. As Anna flipped through the pages, she could see the moment everything changed. The handwriting became less steady, the entries shorter, sometimes just a line or two on days when Lisa must have been too tired or in too much pain to write more. 1. Entry from about a year ago caught Anna's eye. David doesn't cry. Not where Anna can see, not where I can see. But I heard him last night in the garage sobbing like his soul was being torn apart. I pretended to be asleep when he came back to bed. We're all trying so hard to be strong for each other that we're not allowing ourselves to break when we need to. I worry about what will happen to him when I'm gone if he keeps building this dam around his emotions. The pressure will become too great. Anna closed the journal, understanding her mother in a new way. Lisa had known her husband would retreat into silence, would lock away his grief until it physically affected him. That's why she'd written to Anna about being his voice. The house had grown cold as afternoon faded into evening. Anna hadn't realized how long she'd been sitting with her mother's words. She carefully placed everything back in the shoebox except for her own letter, which she folded and put in her pocket, close to her heart. She walked downstairs to check on her father. He was exactly as she'd left him, the sandwich untouched. The only difference was that darkness had fallen and he hadn't bothered to turn on any lights. He sat in shadows, still as a statue. Anna switched on the lamp beside him. In its warm glow, she could see the hollowness in his face, the distant look in his eyes. The doctors had warned about depression after Lisa's death, had suggested grief counseling for both of them. But how could you force someone to get help when they couldn't even acknowledge they needed it? Without saying anything, Anna sat on the arm of his chair. After a moment, she slid down into the small space beside him, squeezing into the chair that was really meant for one person. She rested her head against his shoulder. Mom left us letters, she said softly, and her journal. I think she wanted me to read it. Her father didn't respond, but Anna felt his body tense slightly. He was listening even if he couldn't reply. She knew this would be hard. Anna continued. She tried to prepare us both. The house creaked and settled around them as night deepened. Outside, a light rain began to fall, pattering against the windows. Anna didn't move from her father's side. If he couldn't find his way out of the darkness yet, she would sit with him in it until he could. "We're going to be okay, Dad," she whispered, not entirely believing it herself, but knowing her mother would want her to say it. Not today or tomorrow, but someday. Mom said so in her letter, and she was always right about these things. The first time since they'd sat down, her father moved. His hand found hers, his fingers cold, but his grip surprisingly strong. They stayed like that as the night grew deeper, two broken hearts beating side by side, holding on to each other in the quiet house where a third heart no longer beat, but whose love somehow still surrounded them. A week had passed since the funeral. The house on Maple Street, once filled with Lisa Chen's laughter and warm presence, had become a quiet museum of memories. Neighbors had stopped bringing food. The phone rang less often. The initial wave of sympathy had begun to recede, leaving Anna and her father to face the reality of their new, diminished life. Today, though, the silence would be broken. Uncle Peter had organized a memorial service at their home, a more intimate gathering than the funeral, just for close friends and family. A celebration of Lisa's life, he called it, though Anna couldn't imagine celebrating anything without her mother there. From her bedroom window, Anna watched cars pull up to the curb. Her grandparents from California, who hadn't been able to make it to the funeral due to Grandpa's health, were the first to arrive. Then came Aunt Jenny with her husband and kids, Lisa's colleagues from the library, friends from the neighborhood. One by one, they filled the driveway and street, carrying covered dishes and flower arrangements. Anna smoothed down the blue dress her mother had bought her last Christmas. It was a little short now. She'd grown taller in the months since, but wearing it made her feel closer to Lisa somehow. She'd spent the morning helping Uncle Peter arrange chairs in the living room and setting up a table with her mother's photographs. There was Lisa as a child, gap-toothed and grinning. Lisa in her college graduation cap. Lisa and David on their wedding day. Lisa holding newborn Anna in the hospital, looking exhausted but radiant. Looking at that last picture made Anna's chest hurt. How strange to think that she would now spend more years without her mother than she had with her. A soft knock on her door pulled her from these thoughts. "Anna?" It was Aunt Jenny. "Everyone's starting to arrive. Your dad is downstairs," but she hesitated. "He might need your help greeting people." Anna nodded. She understood what wasn't being said. Her father had barely spoken all week, had eaten only when she reminded him to, had moved through the house like a shadow. The doctor had visited yesterday, concerned about David's heart condition, which seemed to be worsening. "Stress cardiomyopathy," he'd explained to Anna quietly in the kitchen while her father stared blankly at the television. "The grief is physically affecting his heart. We need to monitor him closely." Downstairs, the house was filling with hushed voices and the awkward movements of people trying to navigate someone else's grief. Anna found her father standing by the front door, mechanically shaking hands as people entered. His eyes were vacant, his responses automatic. "Thank you for coming. Yes, it's been difficult. We appreciate your support." The same phrases repeated without emotion or connection. Anna slipped her hand into his. "I'll help greet people, Dad," she said. For a moment his fingers tightened around hers, a flicker of awareness. Then the doorbell rang again, and they were back to the ritual of welcome. Grandma Chen approached them, her eyes red-rimmed behind her glasses. At 72, she had flown across the country despite her arthritis and fear of flying. She pulled Anna into a tight hug that smelled of familiar perfume and mothballs. "My brave girl," she whispered into Anna's hair, "just like your mother." When she released Anna and turned to David, something in her face changed. Concern, perhaps even fear. "David," she said, taking his hands in hers. "You're not well." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm managing, Mother Chen." "No," she said firmly, touching his cheek. "You're not. But we are here now. We will help." More people arrived. The house grew warm with bodies and conversation. Someone had set up a slideshow of photos on the living room television, Lisa, throughout her life, always smiling, always vibrant. Anna watched her father flinch when the images appeared, then turn away. Uncle Peter clinked a glass for attention. If everyone could gather in the living room, we'd like to start sharing our memories of Lisa. People settled into chairs and stood against walls. Anna sat beside her father on the sofa, noticing how he perched on the edge as if preparing to flee. One by one, friends and family members stood to speak. They told stories that made people laugh through tears. About Lisa's terrible cooking but persistent attempts. About her habit of breaking into dance in the grocery store. About her passionate defense of library funding at town meetings. She fought for what mattered, said her boss from the library. Books and children and community. She believed stories could save people. Anna felt each memory like a gift, filling in pieces of her mother she hadn't known or had forgotten. She glanced at her father, hoping to see some spark of connection, but his face remained impassive. He kept touching his chest, rubbing absently over his heart. When it was David's turn to speak, Uncle Peter gave him an encouraging nod. "Would you like to share something, David?" The room fell silent, heavy with expectation. David stood slowly, unsteadily. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. After several agonizing seconds, he shook his head and walked out of the room. A wave of uncomfortable murmurs followed. Aunt Jenny quickly stood. "Let's take a short break. There's food in the kitchen for everyone." As people awkwardly made their way to the refreshments, Anna slipped away to find her father. He wasn't in the kitchen or dining room. The downstairs bathroom door stood open, empty. Finally, she checked the small den at the back of the house, Lisa's favorite room, where she'd graded papers and read books curled up in the window seat. There he was, alone in the dim light, holding their wedding photograph. He didn't look up. When Anna entered, didn't seem to notice her presence at all. His breathing was shallow, his face ashen. For a moment, Anna just watched him, remembering her mother's words from the letter. "When grief makes your father silent, be his voice. When sorrow makes him still, be his movement." Taking a deep breath, Anna crossed the room and did something she hadn't done since before her mother got sick. She climbed onto his lap, the way she used to when she was little and wanted comfort after a nightmare or a scraped knee. At 12, she was too big for this, really, all knees and elbows, but she wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight. At first, he sat frozen, the photograph pressed between them. Then slowly, his free arm came around her back. "Mom left me a letter," Anna said softly against his shoulder. "She told me that you might forget how to be just you without her, that you might get lost in being sad." She felt his body stiffen. She said, "When you can't find words, I should be." "Your voice." Anna pulled back slightly, looking into her father's pale face. "She told me to tell you that it's okay to keep living." David's eyes, which had been focused on nothing for so long, suddenly fixed on Anna's face. Something flickered there. Pain, recognition, a terrible awareness. "Dad," she continued, her voice breaking a little, "I know you miss her. I miss her too. So much that sometimes I can't breathe thinking about it. But she wouldn't want us to stop living because she had to." Anna reached into her dress pocket and pulled out the envelope with her father's name on it. "She wrote to you too. I found it with mine." David stared at the envelope as if it might burn him. His hand shook as he took it. "You don't have to read it right now," Anna said, "but when you're ready it might help." She stayed where she was, her arms still around his neck, her weight pressing against him in a way that she hoped felt like an anchor. For the longest time, they remained that way. The living room sounds muffled by distance, the two of them suspended in their own pocket of grief. Then something changed. A tremor passed through David's body. His breathing quickened. Anna felt wetness against her cheek and realized it wasn't her own tears. Her father was crying. At first, just a silent leak of tears, then a shuddering breath, and finally a sound emerged from deep in his chest, raw and primitive and awful. Anna held on tighter as her father began to sob. great heaving cries that seemed torn from the very center of his being. The photograph slipped from his hand, falling softly to the carpeted floor. Both his arms came around Anna now, holding her, as if she were the only solid thing in a world coming apart. His whole body shook with the force of his grief, finally breaking free after weeks of dangerous containment. Anna's own tears flowed freely as she held her father through the storm. She didn't try to quiet him or tell him it was okay. She just stayed, weathering it with him. She wasn't sure how long they remained like that. Time seemed suspended in the small, dim room. Eventually, she became aware of a presence in the doorway. Uncle Peter stood there, his face a mixture of concern and relief. Behind him, Grandma Chen pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, her eyes wet. "David?" Uncle Peter said softly. "Do you need us to call the doctor?" But Grandma Chen put a restraining hand on his arm. "No," she said. "This is what needs to happen. The tears are healing him." As if to confirm her words, David's sobs were already beginning to ease, his breathing becoming more regular. The color that had been missing from his face for weeks had returned. Not health exactly, but something alive. "Anna," he whispered hoarsely, the first word he'd spoken directly to her in days. Just her name. But in it she heard recognition, love, apology. "I'm here, Dad," she answered, still holding him tightly. "I'm not going anywhere." Gradually, awareness of their surroundings seemed to return to David. He registered the open door, the relatives standing concerned in the hallway, the sounds of the memorial gathering continuing in other parts of the house. "I should go back," he said, his voice rough from crying. "People are waiting." "They understand," Anna told him. "They're here because they loved Mom. They know this is hard." David nodded slowly. He looked down at the envelope still clutched. In his hand, Lisa's handwriting a familiar curve of blue ink. With trembling fingers, he carefully tucked it into his shirt pocket, directly over his heart. "Not yet," he said, more to himself than to Anna. "But soon." Anna climbed off his lap, her legs stiff from sitting in one position too long. She picked up the wedding photograph from the floor, checking that the glass hadn't cracked. The two young faces smiled back at her, her parents in a happier time, full of hope for their future together. A future that had been cut short but had still held so much love. "Ready to go back?" she asked, holding out her hand. David took a deep breath, then reached for his daughter's outstretched hand. "Together," he said. It wasn't quite a question, not quite a statement. "Together," Anna confirmed, squeezing his fingers. As they walked back to the living room, something subtle had shifted between them. The weight of grief was still there. It would be for a long time. But they were carrying it differently now. Sharing it. And in that small change was the first fragile hint that somehow, someday they might find their way forward. When Anna and her father returned to the living room together, the atmosphere in the room changed. The relatives and friends who had been speaking in hushed, careful tones fell silent. Everyone looked at David, his reddened eyes, the wet tracks of tears on his face, the way he still held his daughter's hand as if it were keeping him upright. Anna felt her father's body tremble beside her. She wasn't sure if he was ready for all these eyes on him, all this attention when he'd just experienced his first real emotional release since her mother died. "Dad needs to sit down," she said quietly, to Uncle Peter, who quickly cleared a space on the couch. As they crossed the room, David's steps became unsteady. He put a hand to his chest, his breathing suddenly labored. Halfway to the couch, his knees buckled. "Dad!" Anna cried, trying to hold him up. Uncle Peter rushed forward, catching David before he could fall completely. Together with Anna's grandfather, they helped him to the couch. David's face had gone from flushed to a frightening grayish color. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the room. "I can't breathe right," David gasped, clutching at his chest. Aunt Jenny pushed through the crowd. "I'm calling 911, she said, phone already in hand. "No," David protested weakly. "I just need a minute." But his body told a different story. The hand pressed against his heart was shaking violently. His breathing came in short, painful gasps. "Grandma." Chen knelt beside him, taking his wrist to check his pulse. Before retirement, she had been a nurse for 40 years, and even now she kept her skills sharp volunteering at a clinic. Her face grew serious as she counted heartbeats. "The ambulance is coming," Aunt Jenny announced, returning to the group. 5 minutes out. A strange, strangled sound escaped from David's throat. Not quite a cry, not quite a gasp. His eyes widened with fear as he looked at Anna. "It's okay, Dad," she said, trying to keep her voice steady even as panic rose inside. "Her help is coming." The next few minutes blurred together. People moved around them. Someone brought water, another person a damp cloth for David's forehead. Grandma Chen stayed beside him, monitoring his pulse, speaking to him in a low, calm voice. Then, the paramedics arrived, 2 women in dark blue uniforms carrying equipment bags. The crowd of relatives parted to let them through. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" the first paramedic asked as she knelt beside David. "David Chen," he managed to say. "Mr. Chen, I'm going to put this on your finger to check your oxygen levels," she explained, attaching a small clip to his index finger. Her partner was already wrapping a blood pressure cuff around his arm. Anna stood back, making room for the professionals but unwilling to go far from her father. Uncle Peter put a steadying arm around her shoulders. "Has Mr. Chen had any heart problems before?" the second paramedic asked the room at large. "He has stress cardiomyopathy," Grandma Chen answered. "Diagnosed 3 months ago during his wife's illness. She passed away recently." The paramedics exchanged a meaningful look. "We're going to take you to the hospital, Mr. Chen," the first one said. "Your heart rate is irregular and your blood pressure is concerning. We need to run some tests." As they prepared to move him onto a stretcher, David reached for Anna. "My daughter," he said, his voice strained. "She comes with me." "Of course," the paramedic reassured him. "She can ride in the ambulance." Everything happened quickly after that. The stretcher with her father was wheeled out to the waiting ambulance. Anna climbed in beside him, holding his hand as the paramedics attached monitors and an IV line. Uncle Peter promised to follow in his car. As the ambulance doors closed, Anna caught a glimpse of the gathering on their front lawn. Friends and family with worried faces, some crying, others making phone calls. Then the siren started and they were moving, racing through town toward Memorial Hospital. "Anna," her father said, his voice barely audible over the siren. "I'm sorry." "Don't talk now, Dad," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Just focus on breathing." The paramedic nodded approvingly at Anna while adjusting something on one of the machines. "Your dad's right to have you close," she said. "Sometimes emotional support is as important as medical intervention." At the hospital, things moved even faster. David was wheeled directly into a treatment room while Anna was guided to a waiting area. Uncle Peter arrived minutes later, followed shortly by Grandma Chen. Time stretched in that strange way it does in hospitals, minutes feeling like hours as they waited for news. Finally, a doctor appeared, a woman with silver-streaked dark hair, pulled back in a neat bun. "Family of David Chen?" she asked, approaching their small group. "That's us," Uncle Peter confirmed. "How is he?" "I'm Dr. Rivera," she introduced herself, sitting down across from them. "Your father is stable now," she told Anna, addressing her directly rather than only speaking to the adults. "We've done some tests and what he experienced was an acute stress reaction affecting his heart." "The cardiomyopathy?" Grandma Chen asked. Dr. Rivera nodded. "Yes, but with an interesting development. Based on what the paramedics reported and our initial tests, Mr. Chen seems to have experienced what we sometimes call broken heart syndrome. The medical term is Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. It's a temporary condition where extreme emotional stress, like losing a loved one, can actually change how the heart muscle functions. The heart weakens, particularly in the left ventricle, which is the main pumping chamber." "Is it dangerous?" Anna asked, her voice small. "It can be," Dr. Rivera answered honestly. "But here's what's remarkable in your father's case. According to what he told us and what the paramedics observed, He had an intense emotional release just before his symptoms worsened. He was crying, Anna confirmed. Really crying for the first time since Mom died. Dr. Rivera nodded. And that's actually a good thing. From what we can tell, your father has been suppressing his grief, which was putting tremendous physical stress on his heart. The emotional release, while initially triggering more acute symptoms, appears to have interrupted the dangerous pattern. So the crying helped him? Uncle Peter asked, sounding confused. In a way, yes, Dr. Rivera explained. Think of it like a pressure cooker. If you keep adding pressure without any release, eventually something breaks. Your brother-in-law was holding in all his grief, which was physically damaging his heart. The emotional release was like finally opening the valve, initially causing a rush of symptoms but ultimately beginning to relieve the dangerous pressure. Anna thought about her mother's letter. When grief makes your father silent, be his voice. Somehow Lisa had known this would happen, had understood that David would need help to break through his silence before it broke him. Can we see him? Grandma Chen asked. Yes, but only 2 at a time, and just for a few minutes. He needs rest, Dr. Rivera said. We want to monitor him overnight, maybe longer depending on how his numbers look tomorrow. Anna and Grandma Chen went in first. David was lying in a hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped steadily. He looked exhausted but somehow more present than he had in weeks. His eyes, when they found Anna in the doorway, were fully focused. Hey, kiddo, he said softly. Anna approached the bed carefully, mindful of the wires and tubes. Hey, Dad. I scared you. I'm sorry. She shook her head. You don't need to be sorry. The doctor said this happened because you were holding in too. Much sadness. David glanced at his mother-in-law, who stood on the other side of the bed. I thought I had to be strong, he said. For everyone. For Anna. Strength isn't about not crying, Grandma Chen said, taking his hand. It's about facing the pain, not running from it. David closed his eyes briefly. I didn't know how to live in a world without Lisa. I still don't. But today, when Anna... His voice broke. When she told me what Lisa's letter said, something just shattered inside me, like a wall breaking. The doctor called it broken heart syndrome, Anna told him. She said your heart was actually getting sick from keeping all your feelings locked up. David looked surprised. That's a real thing, Grandma? Chen nodded. Very real. In my nursing career, I saw it several times. The mind and body are connected in ways we're still learning to understand. A nurse appeared in the doorway. 2 more minutes, she said kindly before moving on to check the next room. David reached for Anna's hand. When I read your mother's letter tonight or tomorrow, will you sit with me? He asked. Of course, Dad. And Anna? His voice grew serious. Thank you for being brave enough to break through, for being my voice when I couldn't find words. Anna felt tears prick her eyes. I was just doing what Mom asked me to do in her letter. David's lips curved in the ghost of a smile. She always did know what we needed before we did. The nurse returned to let them know their time was up. As Anna turned to leave, her father called her name one more time. What you did today, he said, hugging me, making me face the pain instead of running from it. The doctor says it might have saved my life. Your mother would be so proud of you. In the hallway, Uncle Peter was waiting for his turn to visit. He put an arm around Anna's shoulders. You okay, kiddo? She nodded, surprising herself by how true it felt. I think we both will be. Not today or tomorrow, but someday, Uncle Peter finished for her. Anna thought about the moment in the den when her father's body had shuddered and the sound emerged from his throat. At first, just a whimper, then growing into deep, wrenching sobs. How she'd been frightened. At first, then realized it was exactly what needed to happen. How the color had returned to his face as tears streamed down his cheeks. The first real sign of life she'd seen in him since her mother's diagnosis. The doctor had called it a physical condition triggered by emotional stress. This broken heart syndrome that could mimic a heart attack. Somehow, Anna's embrace had interrupted the dangerous pattern. She hadn't known that was possible, that feelings could affect a body so strongly, or that showing emotions could be physically healing. As she sat in the hospital waiting room while Uncle Peter took his turn, visiting, Anna thought about her mother's journal and letter, how Lisa had somehow anticipated all of this, had left them a map to find their way back to each other. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered to the quiet hospital air. "I heard your voice today." The morning sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, casting stripes of gold across David's bed. He had spent 3 days under medical supervision, surrounded by machines that tracked every beat of his healing heart. The doctors were amazed by his progress. Dr. Rivera called it remarkable, how quickly his heart function had improved once the emotional dam had broken. "Sometimes the body knows what it needs before the mind does," she told David during morning rounds. "Your heart was literally breaking from unexpressed grief. Now that you've begun to process those emotions, your physical symptoms are responding positively." Anna visited every day after school, bringing homework to do beside her father's bed and small treasures from home. A photo of her mother she'd found tucked inside a cookbook. A funny drawing Lisa had made on a napkin during their last family vacation, little reminders that life had been good once and might be again. On the 4th day, Dr. Rivera announced that David could go home, with regular checkups scheduled and a prescription for medication to support his heart as it continued to heal. "The medicine will help," she said as she signed his discharge papers. "But what your heart needs most is exactly what you're already doing, allowing yourself to feel, to grieve openly, to process this loss with your family." Uncle Peter drove them home, Aunt Jenny having stayed at the house to prepare for their return. When they pulled into the driveway, Anna noticed her father's hands trembling slightly. This was the first time he'd been home since the ambulance had taken him away from the memorial gathering. "You okay, Dad?" she asked softly. He nodded, taking a deep breath. "It's just, the last time I was here, everything changed. Maybe for the better," she suggested, thinking about how different he seemed now. Still sad, still grieving, but present in a way he hadn't been before. The house smelled of cleaning products and something cooking. Soup, Anna realized as they entered. Aunt Jenny greeted them with careful hugs, mindful of David's still fragile state. "I've set up the guest room downstairs," she told him. "Dr. Rivera said you should avoid stairs for a while." David looked toward the staircase that led to the master bedroom he had shared with Lisa. He hadn't slept there since before she died, choosing the living room chair instead. Anna wondered if the guest room might actually be easier, a neutral space without so many memories. That evening, after a quiet dinner that David actually ate rather than just pushed around his plate, the relatives tactfully withdrew to give father and daughter some privacy. Anna found her dad sitting in the den, the same room where the emotional breakthrough had occurred. He was holding her mother's letter, still unopened. "You said you'd sit with me while I read this," he reminded her as she hesitated in the doorway. Anna nodded, crossing to sit beside him on the small love seat. "Whenever you're ready." David's fingers traced Lisa's handwriting on the envelope. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of what she'll say, afraid of feeling everything all over again." "I was scared too," Anna told him. "But Mom knew what we'd need to hear." Taking a deep breath, David carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. As he began to read, Anna watched his face. The subtle changes in expression, the fresh tears that gathered but didn't fall, the slight smile that appeared briefly at what must have been a typical Lisa comment. When he finished reading, he sat silently for a long moment, just holding the paper. "She knew," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "She knew exactly what would happen to me. To us." Anna leaned against her father's shoulder. "What did she say?" David hesitated, then began to read aloud. "My beloved David, by the time you read this, your heart will already have begun to break. Not just emotionally, but physically. The doctors warned me this might happen. I've watched you build walls around your feelings during my illness, storing away your grief for some future time when it would be appropriate to fall apart. But feelings don't work that way, my love. They demand to be felt. I need you to understand something important. Anna needs her father, not a perfect stoic statue of strength, but a real, living, breathing, feeling human being who can show her that it's okay to be broken sometimes. Children learn how to process emotions by watching us. If you hide your grief, she'll hide hers too, and that pain will go somewhere, into her body, her heart, her future. So, cry, David. Scream if you need to. Throw things in the garage where Anna can't hear. Talk to my photograph in the middle of the night. Do whatever you need to do to let this tsunami of feelings move through you instead of drowning you from the inside. And when you're ready, not completely healed because that may never happen, but when you can breathe without feeling like you're underwater, I want you to plant the garden we always talked about. The one with the cherry tree and the stone bench where we imagined growing old together. Plant it with Anna. Watch things grow. Remember that life continues, even when some lives end too soon. I have loved you since we were 20 years old. Not a single day of our life together was wasted, even the hardest ones. Please don't waste the days you have left by living half alive. All my love, now and always, Lisa. David carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. How did she know exactly what we would need? He asked, not really expecting an answer. Anna thought about it. Mom was always good at seeing the bigger picture. Remember how she could predict what would happen in movies 5 minutes in? This brought a genuine smile to David's face, small but real. She ruined so many plot twists. She knew us, Anna said simply, better than we knew ourselves sometimes. The weeks that followed were not easy. Grief didn't disappear just because they'd begun to face it. David still had days when getting out of bed seemed impossible. Anna still cried herself to sleep some nights, clutching the stuffed rabbit her mother had given her years ago. But something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer grieving separately, in lonely parallel tracks, but together, sharing memories, tears, even occasional laughter at remembered jokes or family stories. Spring arrived, turning their small suburban yard into a canvas of possibilities. One Saturday morning, David called Anna into the kitchen where he'd spread out garden catalogs and sketches. I think it's time, he said, pointing to her mother's letter which sat on the table beside the plans, for the garden she wanted. Anna traced the drawing with her finger, a small cherry tree, a curved stone bench, flower beds arranged in concentric circles. Where did this design come from? Your mother drew it, David explained. I found it in her art supplies when I was looking for tape yesterday. She had everything planned out, which plants to put where, even calculations for how many hours of sunlight each area gets. They spent that weekend clearing the back corner of the yard, digging up grass, turning soil. Neighbors noticed the activity and stopped by, first just to check in, then to help. Mr. Yoshida from next door brought over seedlings from his own garden. Mrs. Patterson contributed river stones for a small path. What began as a private memorial project gradually became a community effort. By early summer, the garden was taking shape. The cherry tree, just a slender sapling with a few brave branches, stood at the center. Around it, concentric rings of flowers bloomed in Lisa's favorite colors: purples, blues, and the occasional splash of bright yellow. The stone bench arrived last, delivered by a local mason who, upon hearing the story behind the garden, carved a small lotus flower into one corner, a symbol of rebirth. David's health improved as the garden grew. His follow-up appointments showed steady progress. The medication dosage was reduced, then reduced again. Dr. Rivera noted the correlation between his emotional processing and physical healing in her medical reports, eventually submitting a case study to a journal about the profound connection between grief expression and recovery from stress cardiomyopathy. Anna found her own healing rhythms. She kept a journal like her mother had, writing letters to Lisa about school, about Dad, about the garden. She joined a support group for kids who had lost parents, where she made friends who understood her experience in ways even loving relatives couldn't. And each day she checked the shoebox for any new treasures her mother might have hidden. Notes tucked into winter coats, bookmarks placed in novels Anna would eventually read, little breadcrumbs of love leading her forward. 1 year after Lisa's passing, they held a small gathering in the garden. The cherry tree had survived its first winter and was now dotted with delicate pink blossoms. The bench provided seating for older relatives while children, cousins, and neighbors played carefully around the flowering plants. As twilight approached, David called everyone together. He stood next to the cherry tree, looking more like himself than he had in 2 years. Lisa knew this day would come, he said, his voice steady and clear. She knew we would gather here to remember her, and she knew that by then we would have begun to heal. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Different from the letter Anna had found, something new. I discovered this last week taped to the back of our wedding album. The envelope says, "For the 1-year memorial." A murmur went through the gathering. Even now, Lisa was surprising them, reaching across time. David opened the envelope and read, "If you're reading this, you've made it through the hardest year of your lives. The fact that you're here, in this garden, means you've begun to move forward, just as I hoped you would. Remember that grief and joy can coexist. Make space for both. Plant new memories alongside the old ones, and know that love doesn't end with death. It just changes form." As the sun set, casting long shadows, across their new garden, Anna stood beside her father, his arm around her shoulders. The weight of loss was still there, a stone they would always carry. But they had learned to carry it together, and somehow that made all the difference. In the soft evening light, among friends and family and blooming flowers, Anna thought she felt her mother's presence, not as a ghost or a supernatural visitation, but as a continuation of the love that had shaped her family. It lived in her father's recovering heart, in her own growing resilience, and in the garden that would bloom, year after year, a living testament to the miracle that can grow from heartbreak, the miracle of continuing to live.